The island of Leyte, late November 1944, simmered under a haze of heat and cordite. For weeks, American infantry had clawed their way inland, fighting through rice paddies, palm groves, and narrow trails cut into the hills. Japanese forces, outnumbered but deeply entrenched, relied on one advantage that no rifle squad or tank platoon could match: their ability to call down air raids within minutes. Every time American troops pushed forward, a Japanese spotter would disappear into the jungle canopy, and, like clockwork, Japanese bombers or fighters would scream overhead. Sometimes the attacks came with explosives. Sometimes they came with strafing fire. But always they came fast. And morale inside the 182nd Infantry Regiment was breaking. "Every time we moved 10 yards, Private Norris muttered, wiping sweat from his eyes. "Those planes drop out of nowhere, like they're psychic." "They're not psychic," Sergeant Vickers growled. "They got damn good spotters." But one man in the regiment, a quiet, thin, soft-spoken carpenter from Minnesota, tilted his head thoughtfully as he listened. His name was Charlie Hagan, 26 years old, former barn builder turned Army engineer. He had no medals, no combat record of note, no reputation, except that he could carve anything out of wood faster than most men could draw it on paper. And that mattered, because Hagan had noticed something others overlooked. The Japanese spotters were responding not to troop movement, but to shapes, silhouettes, shadows. Anything that looked like an artillery piece or an ammo dump drew immediate attention from the sky. So Hagan approached Captain Riley that evening, standing in the dim glow of a covered lantern. "Sir," he said softly, "I think I can fix our air raid problem." Riley stared at him. "You? With what?" "We barely have lumber for bridges." Hagan held up a small, freshly carved block of wood, a miniature shape resembling the profile of an American 105mm howitzer, down to the barrel flare. "This isn't a howitzer, sir," he said. "It's bait." Riley blinked. "You're telling me you want to build fake guns?" Hagan nodded. "Not just guns. Convoys, fuel depots, AA batteries, engineer camps. Anything they're desperate to hit. We'll give their spotters so many juicy targets, they won't know it's real." A lieutenant snorted. "And how long will these decoys hold up?" "First rainstorm, and your toys will melt." Hagan smiled faintly. "They're not meant to last, sir. They're meant to be seen." He unfurled the crude map and pointed to a series of ridges, valleys, and abandoned rice terraces. "We place them where spotters can't get close," he said. "We exaggerate the shadows. We use heat, mirrors, smoke, anything to trick their eyes. If they think we're everywhere, they waste their planes everywhere." Riley crossed his arms. "You seriously think the Japanese Air Command will launch raids on lumps of wood?" Hagan shrugged. "They've been hitting shadows for weeks." He looked up, calm and certain. "Let's give them more shadows." By dawn, Hagan and a handful of engineers slipped into the jungle with axes, rope, canvas scraps, and whatever lumber they could scavenge. Within 72 hours, the Japanese would launch 44 separate air raids, all against wooden illusions Hagan had carved by hand. And those decoys would reshape the entire battle for Leyte. The island of Leyte, late November 1944, simmered under a haze of heat and cordite. For weeks, American infantry had clawed their way inland, fighting through rice paddies, palm groves, and narrow trails cut into the hills. Japanese forces, outnumbered but deeply entrenched, relied on one advantage that no rifle squad or tank platoon could match: their ability to call down air raids within minutes. Every time American troops pushed forward, a Japanese spotter would disappear into the jungle canopy, and, like clockwork, Japanese bombers or fighters would scream overhead. Sometimes the attacks came with explosives. Sometimes they came with strafing fire. But always they came fast. And morale inside the 182nd Infantry Regiment was breaking. "Every time we moved 10 yards, Private Norris muttered, wiping sweat from his eyes. "Those planes drop out of nowhere, like they're psychic." "They're not psychic," Sergeant Vickers growled. "They got damn good spotters." But one man in the regiment, a quiet, thin, soft-spoken carpenter from Minnesota, tilted his head thoughtfully as he listened. His name was Charlie Hagan, 26 years old, former barn builder turned Army engineer. He had no medals, No combat record of note. No reputation, except that he could carve anything out of wood faster than most men could draw it on paper. And that mattered, because Hagen had noticed something others overlooked. The Japanese spotters were responding not to troop movement, but to shapes, silhouettes, shadows. Anything that looked like an artillery piece or an ammo dump drew immediate attention from the sky. So Hagen approached Captain Riley that evening, standing in the dim glow of a covered lantern. "Sir," he said softly, "I think I can fix our air raid problem." Riley stared at him. "You? With what?" "We barely have lumber for bridges." Hagen held up a small, freshly carved block of wood, a miniature shape resembling the profile of an American 105mm howitzer, down to the barrel flare. "This isn't a howitzer, sir," he said. "It's bait." Riley blinked. "You're telling me you want to build fake guns?" Hagen nodded. "Not just guns. Convoys, fuel depots, AA batteries, engineer camps. Anything they're desperate to hit. We'll give their spotters so many juicy targets, they won't know it's real." A lieutenant snorted. "And how long will these decoys hold up? First rainstorm, and your toys will melt." Hagen smiled faintly. "They're not meant to last, sir. They're meant to be seen." He unfurled the crude map and pointed to a series of ridges, valleys, and abandoned rice terraces. "We place them where spotters can't get close," he said. "We exaggerate the shadows. We use heat, mirrors, smoke, anything to trick their eyes. If they think we're everywhere, they waste their planes everywhere." Riley crossed his arms. "You seriously think the Japanese Air Command will launch raids on lumps of wood?" Hagen shrugged. "They've been hitting shadows for weeks." He looked up, calm and certain. "Let's give them more shadows." By dawn, Hagen and a handful of engineers slipped into the jungle with axes, rope, canvas scraps, and whatever lumber they could scavenge. Within 72 hours, the Japanese would launch 44 separate air raids, all against wooden illusions Hagen had carved by hand. And those decoys would reshape the entire battle for Leahy. By the next morning, the jungle around Hagen's sector looked less like a battlefield and more like a carpenter's fever dream. Half-assembled silhouettes, bamboo frames drying in the sun, painted canvas stretched over improvised scaffolding, and piles of scrap lumber waiting to become something that looked dangerous. The Japanese spotters on Ridge 42, however, saw something entirely different. An American division expanding its footprint overnight. 3 new fuel depots, a mock artillery park, the shadow of what looked like a truck column, 2 supposed anti-aircraft batteries dug into the scrub. None of it real. All of it intentionally placed just within visual range and just beyond verification. A new layer of deception, movement. Hagen paced along the terrace, studying shadows as the sun climbed. "Stationary targets won't fool them forever," he said. Dwyer wiped sweat from his neck. "What are you thinking now?" "Movement," Hagen replied. "Real troops change positions. Real trucks come and go. Real artillery rolls forward." Yates frowned. "So you want the decoys to move?" Hagen smiled faintly. "Not actually move, but appear to." He grabbed a wooden pole, jammed it beneath the chassis of a fake truck silhouette, and pushed. The canvas-covered frame shifted just a few inches. Dwyer blinked. "That's it." "No," Hagen said. He pushed again, just a bit more. "And that?" Yates shrugged. "I don't get it." "Japanese spotters are charting positions hour by hour," Hagen explained. "If a decoy shifts even slightly between observations, they assume it's real. Real assets move." Dwyer let out a low whistle. "So we did nudge things around all day?" "Not all day," Hagen said. "Just enough to cause doubt. Doubt forces verification. Verification forces air raids. And air raids meant bombs being wasted on wood." Raid number 11. The first panic in the Japanese ranks. At 0930 hours, the first Japanese fighter-bomber formation of the day roared overhead. Spotters had reported increased truck activity near the central terraces. The pilots came low, fast, aggressive. Dwyer flinched as explosions tore apart the fake convoy, sending canvas and splintered bamboo flying through the air. One Japanese bomber peeled upward in a hard climb. Too hard. Hagen shaded his eyes. "Overcorrection," he murmured. Dwyer frowned. "What?" But then they heard it. A metallic screech from above. The bomber had pulled up so sharply to avoid AA guns that didn't exist that it stalled for a moment before recovering. Hagen exhaled slowly. They're nervous. That means we're ahead. Decoy expansion, making the island look alive. By noon, Hagen's team had expanded operations. A fake engineer camp with drying laundry and tent shadows. Wooden fuel barrels arranged in pyramid stacks. A dummy command post built from crates and bamboo. Camouflage netting painted to imply trucks hidden beneath. Decoy footprints crafted using carved wooden saws strapped to poles. Yates laughed when Hagen pressed a pole into the mud, stamping a pattern of boot tracks. "This is madness," Yates said, shaking his head. "This is war," Hagen corrected him. "Madness is standard." But the footprints served a purpose. They suggested movement around the decoys, reinforcing the illusion. And the Japanese spotters bought it. They radioed sightings all afternoon. Increased artillery presence. Supply depot expansion. Truck activity along Terrace Road. Possible anti-aircraft emplacements. None were real. Every report triggered another air sortie. Raids hashtag 1221. The bombers grow confused. By mid-afternoon, the sky above the valley echoed with aircraft engines nearly every hour. Bomber crews reported conflicting intelligence. Some saw gun barrels that shifted position. Others saw supply dumps that vanished because canvas blew away. One pilot swore he hit an ammo depot, only to ignite a pile of hollow crates. Another circled 3 times to try to locate a truck column shadow. "They don't know what's real anymore," Dwyer said. "That's the point," Hagen replied. Yates shook his head. "How many raiders is that now?" 21, Hagen said, jotting a note on his pad. "We're nearly halfway to breaking their air schedule." Dwyer frowned. "What's that mean?" "It means," Hagen said, "if we can confuse them enough, they'll waste entire sorties on phantom targets. Their air command will tighten fuel, tighten flight schedules, maybe even rotate out pilots for fatigue. All of that slows down their real strike capability. And that," he added, "saves lives." The Japanese change tactics. Hagen adapts instantly. Just after 1,600 hours, something unusual happened. The next Japanese flight didn't bomb the usual spots. Instead, it strafed a ridge line further west, an area Hagen hadn't touched. Yates swore. "They're searching. They know we're faking them out." Hagen studied the pattern. "No," he said softly. "They're hunting the source of the fakes." Dwyer blinked. "How can you tell?" "They're hitting observation angles, not targets." Hagen's mind raced. "They think we're hiding the real assets elsewhere." He snapped his fingers. "We shift everything to support that lie." Nightfall. The most convincing trick yet. Under fading daylight, Hagen deployed his boldest illusion, a fake nighttime truck convoy. He and the engineers placed oil lamps behind slitted wooden boxes along the terrace's edge. Each box had a painted strip of reflective tin, creating the impression of headlights. Again and again, dozens of them, all moving slowly. Dwyer stared in awe. "It looks like a whole column." "It is," Hagen said, "just not one that exists." And right on cue, raid number 22, number 23, and number 24 screamed overhead within the hour, bombing the glowing convoy over and over until nothing but charred earth remained. But not a single American truck had been touched. Not a single soldier fired upon. By midnight, 29 raids and counting. The final raid of the day thundered across the valley at 2,330 hours. The jungle flashed with firelight as bombs shredded a fake AA nest and 2 decoy tents. Yates leaned back against a tree, exhausted. "How many is that?" 29, Hagen murmured. Dwyer whistled softly. "If we hit 40 raids, Command's going to think you're a magician." Hagen shrugged. "No magician, just a carpenter who knows how people see what they expect to see." He looked toward the dark horizon. "And tomorrow we make them expect even more." The sun rose on Leyte with a heaviness that felt almost unnatural. Smoke hung over the terraces in thick ribbons, drifting lazily between palm trunks. The ground still smoldered from the previous night's raids. Dozens of bomb craters pocking landscapes where nothing but wood and canvas had died. Hagen stood quietly at the crest of a ridge, boots planted in ash. He watched the horizon as the morning haze lifted. revealing the damage the Japanese bombers thought they'd inflicted. Dwyer climbed up beside him. "You look worried," he said. "I'm thinking," Hagen replied without looking away. "About what?" "How predictable humans are." Dwyer frowned. "That doesn't sound like a problem." "It is," Hagen said, "because predictable people stop being effective. The Japanese will adapt again. We need the next phase before they figure out what we're doing. The new decoy. Something big enough to demand a strike." Hagen led the team into a dried-out paddy hidden between two ridges. He knelt and drew a large shape in the mud. A squat profile, high shoulders, a long barrel. Yates squinted. "Is that a Sherman tank?" "Close," Hagen said. "Close enough for the Japanese." Dwyer sputtered. "You want to build a fake tank? Out of wood?" Hagen shrugged. "Yes." "Why?" "Because tanks attract more fire than trucks. If they think armor is moving into this valley, they'll escalate raids. Harder raids, faster ones." Dwyer shook his head. "And that helps us how?" "Because when they escalate," Hagen said, "they get sloppy. And sloppy raids mean wasted ordnance and exploitable patterns. Constructing the illusion of armor." The fake tank took shape over 3 exhausting hours. Bamboo ribs forming the hull, canvas painted with mud and charcoal, a turret carved from overlapping planks, a false barrel built from palm logs shaved down, treads represented by painted boards and dragged trenches to mimic track marks. But the key, the true heart of the illusion, came from a simple idea: heat. Hagen placed a metal bucket beneath the canvas hull with smoldering coconut husks, creating the illusion of a warm engine visible to aerial reconnaissance. He wiped his hands on his trousers. "From 500 meters up," he said, "this will look like a tank ready for combat." Dwyer stared at the decoy. "You're a lunatic, Hagen." "Thank you." Japanese High Command notices something strange. At 0935 hours, a Japanese reconnaissance plane passed overhead. The spotter in the rear cockpit scanned the valley with high-powered binoculars. He froze. Below him, in a narrow terrace, sat the unmistakable silhouette of a Sherman-like tank. He leaned toward the pilot and shouted, "They have armor. New position." The pilot banked and marked the coordinates. The report reached Air Command in under 5 minutes. A major slammed his fist onto the desk. "American armor massing on the ridge. Prepare, fighters." A full flight of Ki-43 Oscar fighters and Ki-48 bombers took off within the hour, forming the most coordinated strike the valley had seen in weeks. Hagen watched them approach. Dwyer muttered, "Oh hell, how many is that?" "Enough," Hagen said. "Exactly enough. Raid #30, 34. Bombing a tank that was never there." Hagen's team hugged the jungle floor as the first formation dove. Bombs whistled, exploded, ripped open the earth. Canvas shredded. Bamboo skeletons snapped. The fake tank disintegrated instantly, obliterated in a geyser of dirt and flame. Yates covered his head. "That's it. They figured it out. They got the tank. We're done." But Hagen wasn't watching the decoy. He was watching the bombers. Specifically where they peeled away. "How many planes banked east?" he asked. Dwyer blinked. "I don't know. Why does that matter?" "Because," Hagen said quietly, "they believed that was only the first tank." He pointed to the far ridge, where sunlight hit a large canvas shape the Japanese hadn't noticed until now. A decoy shadow representing a second tank, and beyond that, a third. Dwyer's jaw dropped. "You planned this?" "I hoped for it," Hagen replied. The Japanese panic. Raids #35. 39 hit nothing but illusion. Now in full alarm, Japanese Air Command launched a series of rapid-fire raids. After destroying the first decoy, planes returned to hit the second tank, which was actually a tarp stretched over broken crates. The third tank, which was nothing but a dugout with painted shadows. A supposed fuel storage depot, which was hollow barrels arranged in a circle. Hagen calmly took notes as explosions rocked the ridges. "They've lost the plot," he said. "They're striking anything that might be a threat." Dwyer stared at him. "How many raids is this now?" 39, Hagen answered. "And you said 44 was the goal?" "Yes." "Oh God." The decoy that triggered the biggest raid yet. Before sunset, Hagen prepared his final deception for the day. A dummy anti-aircraft battery made from wooden pipes, a circular pit, 2 angled gun barrels of bamboo, a fake generator made from a crate and tin, freshly dragged footprints to imply crew movement. He positioned it in a clearing where the late afternoon sun cast deep shadows, making the barrels appear thicker and more threatening. Yates squinted at it. This looks real. That's the idea, Hagen said. At 1,745 hours, a Japanese scout plane passed overhead and spotted the AA battery. He radioed immediately. Enemy anti-aircraft emplacement. Dangerous. Require suppression. Within minutes, the largest raid yet assembled. Ocean-bound bombers, high-altitude fighters, and low-level attackers, all converging on a target that did not exist. Dwyer turned to Hagen, wide-eyed. Raid 40. Hagen nodded. For more to go. As the bombs began to fall, lighting the eastern ridge in fire and smoke, Hagen whispered to himself, "This is for the men who survived today, and for the ones who might survive tomorrow." Night fell fast on Leyte, swallowing the jungle in thick shadows that seemed to pulse with leftover heat from the bombings. The ridgelines glowed faintly where fires still smoldered, but the valley floor remained shrouded in darkness, quiet, deceptive waiting. Hagen knelt beside a half-finished wooden frame, the last lantern of the night flickering beside him. His hands moved slowly now, carefully. He was no longer just shaping decoys. He was shaping the enemy's expectations. Dwyer approached, rubbing his temples. Hagen, we're at 40. 40 raids. That's Jesus, that's insane. You really think the Japanese will fall for more after blowing half the valley into orbit? Hagen didn't look up. Yes. Why? Because right now they're convinced they're missing something. And the moment an enemy believes they're behind, he tapped the wooden frame. They start seeing ghosts. The big illusion, a phantom supply operation. Hagen rose and gestured to the terraced slope below. Tonight, he said, we make them believe we're preparing a major resupply operation. Yates blinked. We don't even have resupply trucks. We don't need them, Hagen replied. We only need the shape of one. Using rope, bamboo crates, and 2 tarps stitched together, the engineers constructed the outline of a large military cargo truck, complete with a raised engine hood, fake headlamps crafted from polished canteen bottoms, wooden wheels partially buried to mimic weight, a shadow canopy painted with charcoal to resemble night camouflage. But the magic wasn't the truck. It was what Hagen placed around it. He had the men carry empty crates and stack them near the model, dragging boot tracks in the mud to imply soldiers moving equipment. Then he positioned a small oil lamp under the truck's front, its flame flickering against the canteen headlamps, so that from the air, they looked like warming engine lights. Dwyer let out a breath. I hate how good you are at this. Hagen simply said, the enemy fears what keeps moving after dark. Raid number 41, a precision strike on a truck that didn't exist. At 20:30 hours, the telltale drone of aircraft rose over the hills. Spotters had reported. American night transport activity. Suppress immediately. Hagen and the team hit the dirt as a bomber wing sliced through the clouds, their silhouettes illuminated by moonlight. Wump crockum boom. The entire terrace erupted as bombs churned the earth, blasting the phantom truck into splinters. Tarps flew through the air like dying birds. When the explosion stopped, Dwyer peeked over the ridge. That one would have killed a whole platoon. Hagen nodded. And it killed nothing. That's the point. He checked his notebook. 41. The Japanese spotters grow suspicious. A new threat emerges. Unexpectedly, the next Japanese reconnaissance sweep behaved differently. The plane flew lower, slower, more methodically. Yates bit his lip. They're trying to verify targets now. They're not going to commit strikes unless they're sure. Dwyer swallowed. We might be done. But Hagen's gaze sharpened. No, this is good. How? When an enemy becomes cautious, they require more evidence, which means we only need to give them one detail that feels true, and they'll build the rest in their heads. He pointed to a barren hillside. Nothing there but rocks. Time for something simple, he said. Something invisible unless you're looking for it. Decoy strategy number 42. The illusion of an artillery trail. Hagen didn't build a gun, a truck, or a tank. He built a trail using 2 long poles and a plank carved into a shallow V. He and Dwyer dragged distinctive double grooves across the hillside, marks that looked exactly like artillery wheels being towed uphill. They made them curve, then vanish into brush, then reappear on another terrace. Nothing existed at the end of the trail. No gun, no crew, no equipment, just the implication of movement. Dwyer stepped back, puzzled. This doesn't even make sense. There's nothing up there. That's why it works, Hagen said. If the spotters believe we moved artillery into defilade, they'll have to hit it. Raid number 42. The Japanese bomb the invisible. When the reconnaissance plane passed again, its observer stiffened. Artillery trails, recently made. Gun must be concealed in brush near Second Terrace. Within minutes, a bomber command dispatch was issued. Raid number 42 screamed in on a shallow angle, dropping ordnance across the terraces, hitting nothing but dirt. A crater dozens of feet wide marked where the concealed gun had supposedly been hiding. Yates stared at the destruction. There wasn't even a prop there, it was just lines in the dirt. That's the thing about fear, Hagen murmured. It fills in the blanks. The last 2 raids require something dramatic. Dwyer approached him as the smoke drifted across the valley. Okay, Hagen, we're at 42. 2 more. What now? Build a fake battleship. Hagen cracked a rare smile. No, something much simpler. He pointed to the hillside. A shadow. Yates blinked. What? A shadow with the right angles? Hagen said. Can be anything a pilot fears. At dusk, he constructed a large silhouette using branches, cloth scraps, 2 boards, a lantern placed low behind them. He arranged everything to project the silhouette of a long-range radio antenna, the kind used to direct artillery fire. From the air, it looked unmistakably like a forward observer HQ preparing to coordinate a large offensive. The Japanese spotter reported. Signal intelligence, station detected. Priority target. Raid number 43 hit minutes later, flattening the hillside. Hagen watched unspeaking. 1 more, he said quietly. Raid number 44. The decoy that broke the pattern forever. For the final illusion, Hagen went back to the basics. A lone wooden howitzer silhouette, but placed in an impossible position, hidden under a partially collapsed palm canopy, requiring incredibly sharp eyes to spot. It was a trap meant for prideful spotters, and it worked. The last reconnaissance plane circled again and again before finally radioing, found concealed artillery under foliage, marking for strike. Raid number 44 descended like a hammer. Bombs tore through the palms, shredding the decoy in a shower of splinters. Smoke boiled upward. When the raid ended, Dwyer looked at Hagen. That's 44. You did it. Hagen closed his notebook. No, he said. We survived it. By dawn of the next day, the air above Leyte was strangely quiet. No reconnaissance, drones of engines, no sweeping patrol flights, no sudden shadow of wings flashing overhead, just wind rustling through shredded canvas, and the distant crackle of smoldering brush. The Japanese Air Command had spent 2 full days chasing ghosts, 44 separate sorties, each launched with urgency, each wasted on illusions that dissolved under the force of their own bombs. And slowly, as confusion turned into doubt, and doubt hardened into suspicion, their entire air support network began to falter. The psychological collapse of an air command. Inside a Japanese forward command bunker, a heated argument erupted. Spotters insisted they saw armor. Pilots insisted they destroyed it. Artillery officers insisted American guns kept moving. Intelligence officers insisted the terrain didn't match expected troop positions. A flustered major slammed a report onto the table. We have destroyed 17 artillery pieces, 8 tanks, and 3 supply depots. Another officer replied stiffly, Sir, none of these were present during ground engagements. A tense silence stretched across the bunker. They had begun to see the truth. They weren't fighting the Americans. They were fighting their own assumptions, molded by shadows built in the jungle. And that was the moment Hagen had been waiting for. Hagen's team observes the shift. On the American side, Hagen crouched on a ridge with binoculars. The lack of aircraft wasn't calm. It was a vacuum of fear. Dwyer eased down beside him. You think they're finally catching up? Yes, Hagen said quietly. And that's why they're dangerous right now. Yates frowned. I don't get it. Isn't this good? No more planes. Hagen lowered the binoculars. Desperation makes an enemy unpredictable. We pushed them off their routine. Now, for the first time, they'll start questioning what isn't there. Dwyer shook his head. So what do we do? Hagen zipped his pack closed. We give them something to find. The final illusion. A decoy meant not to be bombed, but to be rejected. Hagen led the team to a ridge saturated with craters, one the Japanese had struck repeatedly during earlier raids. Amid the devastation, Hagen began assembling a new decoy. A howitzer frame, too perfect, too deliberate. A tarp cover, too smooth, too clean. Tracks fresh, obvious, nearly theatrical. Dwyer stared. Hagen, this one looks fake. Yes, Hagen said. Why? Because I want them to ignore it. Yates blinked. You want them to not bomb something? I'm lost. Hagen explained. Right now they're distrusting anything that looks like a trap. If they see something too clean, too staged, too obvious, they'll disregard. And when they disregard it, they'll assume we've stopped moving assets. Dwyer's eyes widened. And if they think we've stopped moving assets, they'll stop launching raids. Yates exhaled slowly. Holy hell, you're ending the cycle by making them believe they outsmarted us. Hagen nodded. Exactly. The recon flight that changed the battle. At 1,020 hours, a lone Japanese scout plane buzzed the valley. It passed over. The clean decoy too perfect. The earlier bombing sites still smoking. The terraces with destroyed shadows. The open slopes where nothing moved. The spotter leaned out, studying the valley. It was empty, silent, still. He radioed, enemy activity has ceased. No further air raids required. Back at Japanese Air Command, officers exhaled in relief. Finally, something they felt they could trust. They grounded their strike units to conserve fuel. No more bombers, no more fighters, no more artillery suppression runs. Their air campaign over Leyte ended not with a decisive strike, but with quiet surrender to confusion. The American advance that followed. With skies suddenly clear, American infantry surged forward across the valley. No strafing runs, no precision bombing, no forced delays. For the first time in weeks, units advanced under open daylight without praying for cloud cover. A lieutenant marveled. Where the hell did their planes go? Captain Riley, watching the progress through field glasses, simply said, they bombed themselves out of the fight. Hagen and his team were already cutting new logs for bridges. As if nothing unusual had happened, Dwyer approached them. They're advancing everywhere. Japanese lines are breaking. They've got nothing to stop us with. Hagen wiped sweat from his brow. They stopped themselves. Recognition. But only among those who saw the truth. That evening, back at the regimental perimeter, soldiers clapped Hagen on the back, shook his hand, and laughed with a mix of awe and disbelief. You made him bomb a shadow. 44 raids on nothing. You're a miracle worker, Hagen. Hagen only smiled shyly. I'm just a woodworker, he said. Hit the wrong tree with the right light. And suddenly everyone thinks there's an army behind it. Dwyer leaned in. You saved hundreds of lives, maybe thousands. Hagen didn't answer. He wasn't thinking about victory. He was thinking about how fragile perception was, how war could hinge on something as delicate as a shadow cast just right on a leaf, and how sometimes the most powerful weapon wasn't steel or fire, but belief. When the valley finally fell silent, veterans from the 182nd Infantry would later insist it was the strangest turning point of the Leyte campaign. Not a decisive artillery barrage, not a breakthrough armor charge, not even a major air intervention, but the sudden, total absence of Japanese aircraft. No more bombing runs, no more strafing, no more terror in the skies. The Japanese hadn't run out of planes. They hadn't run out of fuel. They had simply, and disastrously, stopped believing their own eyes. And that collapse of confidence could be traced back to one man quietly carving shapes in the jungle. Private First Class Charlie Hagen. A victory built from wood and imagination. When commanders reviewed the after-action reports, the numbers stunned them. 44 Japanese air raids. Over 2 days, almost all against structures that weighed less than a single artillery shell. Losses to the Americans from those raids? 0. Meanwhile, Japanese squadrons spent precious fuel, time, and strategic attention attacking decoys, shadows, and illusions, leaving their ground forces unsupported during a critical phase of the battle. This gap allowed U.S. infantry and armor to advance across open terrain that had been suicide just 48 hours earlier. Entire battalions moved without interference. Supply lines reopened. Fire missions landed without counterattacks. Charlie Hagen's wooden illusions didn't just waste enemy bombs. They broke the rhythm of an entire air campaign. The official record barely mentions him. In divisional history logs, Hagen's contribution appears in a single line. Engineered deception measures reduced hostile air effectiveness. That was it. No medals, no ceremony, not even his name. But to the men who fought beside him, the story was unforgettable. One sergeant wrote home, "If you ever doubt what one man with a pocket knife can do, think of Hagen. He carved us a new sky." Another infantryman, decades later, told his grandson, "We beat their planes with plywood. Tell your teacher that." Life after the war. When the war ended, Hagen returned to Minnesota and reopened his family carpentry shop. Locals brought him furniture to repair, barns to build, porches to reinforce. He never talked about late, never bragged, never explained how a quiet woodworker manipulated an entire air force into punching itself out. But every now and then, when a customer tried to describe a shape they wanted, he'd interrupt gently. "Don't worry, I can picture it." Because Hagen understood shapes, how they fooled the eye, how they could bend perception, how they could tell lies that felt like truth. And in one desperate jungle, those shapes saved lives. Legacy of the 44 Phantom Raids. Today, historians studying military deception often compare Hagen's work to the famed Ghost Army in Europe. But those units had trucks, paint crews, inflatable tanks, and radio operators. Hagen had a handful of engineers, scrap lumber, canvas, smoke pots, canteen-bottom mirrors, and a genius for understanding what people expected to see. He turned the jungle into a hall of mirrors. He made empty terraces look like fortified strongholds. He made moonlit shadows look like moving armor columns. And he forced the Japanese to fight a battle that didn't exist. A battle that cost them initiative, time, and the certainty every army relies on. The final reminder. Years later, when a military historian tracked him down and asked how he managed to fool so many spotters and pilots, Hagen simply replied, "People see what they're afraid of. I just helped them see it sooner." No boast, no pride, just the quiet truth of a man who understood the battlefield's most overlooked terrain, the mind. If this story impressed you, do me a favor and hit that like button so more people can discover these hidden moments of ingenuity from World War II. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and whether anyone in your family served. And make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss our next cinematic war story. ****.